Have you ever felt like you spent your whole life trying to be seen by someone who never truly looked at you? This wound is more common than most people realize, but it's rarely talked about because, unlike mothers, fathers often fail in silence. He may have been present, but his attention never fully reached you. And growing up without that attention means constantly trying to prove your worth through success, toughness, or silence. You learn to endure, but deep down, you're still waiting to be recognized. Carl Jung was one of the first to show that a father's absence goes beyond a personal experience. It touches something deeper. In the psyche, the father represents the center of authority, the energy to face life, and the source of validation. When that figure fails through absence, neglect, emotional coldness, or excessive pressure, something breaks inside the child. What's missing isn't just love. It's a sense of self-worth. Today, I want to help you identify this emotional wound and give you a practical step to begin healing it. And at the end of this video, I'll leave you with a simple but powerful challenge, one that could help you break free from the influence of a presence that was never fully there. From early childhood, the mind creates inner images to understand the world. Jung called these archetypes universal patterns that shape how we experience emotions. Before we even know how to speak, one of the most important is the father archetype. On a symbolic level, the father is more than just a person. He represents the psychological force that helps us separate from emotional dependence on the mother and begin our journey toward becoming ourselves. It's the energy that helps us step into life with courage and direction. If the mother symbolizes love and nurturing, the father represents strength, guidance, and protection. The mother supports the heart. The father prepares you to face the world. That's why the father wound is often more silent and yet more damaging. While the absence of the mother creates emotional emptiness, the absence of the father creates a weak foundation, a lack of direction, and missing validation that quietly affects us from within. If you're curious about how the mother wound might be affecting your life, we have a full video on that topic here on the channel. It's one of the most insightful ones we've created. We receive messages every day from people saying it helped them feel truly understood for the first time. If that resonates with you, the link is in the description. It's worth watching. But back to the father. When the father archetype appears in a healthy way through a present and emotionally available father, it creates a foundation of steady and safe authority. It's the father who guides without overpowering, who corrects without shaming, who challenges without leaving. He gives direction, sets limits, teaches values, and most importantly, he sees you. He looks at you and says, "You matter. You belong," even without words. But when that archetype fails, when the father is passive, aggressive, emotionally absent, or even idealized to an extreme, a break occurs in the psyche. The child doesn't get the support needed to step confidently into the world. Instead, they grow up feeling uncertain, conflicted, and often stuck waiting for the recognition that never arrived. This absence can't be replaced by gifts, physical presence, or strict authority. What's missing is emotional presence, and without it, the father archetype becomes distant and unreachable. What should give us structure ends up making us feel stuck. Jung said that every person must eventually break away from their inner image of the father to become whole. But when the father was never really there, what breaks isn't the influence but the ability to trust. And what we seek isn't freedom but a sense of belonging. Because that belonging never received becomes something we keep chasing. It starts in childhood, but it doesn't disappear with age. It just changes form, stays in the background, running our adult lives like an invisible force. Most people don't realize it, but that ongoing exhaustion you feel, the pressure to constantly perform, the inability to rest, it often begins with this emotional wound. The child who wasn't seen grows into an adult trying to be perfect. They seek validation through success, through work, through status. Work becomes a place to prove they are good enough, but no matter what they achieve, something still feels missing, as if there's a debt that can never be paid off. Jung explains that the father wound doesn't go away with time. It becomes part of the ego, part of how we see ourselves and the world. The adult shaped by this absence often lives in quiet stress, believing love must be earned daily. That one mistake could bring back the judgment of a father who never truly saw them. That's what drives self-sabotage. It's not a character flaw, it's the result of an emotional injury. Deep down, a part of you still believes you're undeserving, still feels guilty for receiving, still can't fully accept love, success, or attention, because those moments trigger the same discomfort linked to the father's gaze, whether it was harsh, impatient, critical, or missing altogether. Many carry this discomfort without knowing where it comes from. They say things like, "I'm just anxious," or "I don't like attention," or "I don't trust people." But these aren't traits, they're emotional memories acting as identities. They're coping strategies built to deal with pain that still lives inside. Growing up without a father who could reflect your worth means growing up without a clear image of who you are. So, the child tries to create self-worth alone, but without a model. That process is incomplete. The result is often an adult who functions well on the outside, but feels worn down inside. Someone who carries everything, but worries it could fall apart at any time. That insecurity you carry, it's not a flaw. It's survival. It's emotional intelligence that adapted early on, learning that love was uncertain and value had to be earned. But the same approach that once protected you may now be keeping you stuck. Recognizing this is the first step in breaking the cycle. Not all wounds look the same. Some are quiet. Others return as memories, but both leave lasting effects. When it comes to the father wound, it's important to understand that it can appear into very different, but equally serious forms. There's the active wound, the one you can clearly name, the father who was aggressive, violent, or created fear instead of safety, harsh criticism, humiliation, lack of affection, constant comparisons. These are what many recognize as obvious forms of trauma. They leave sharp, specific memories, hurtful words, painful silences. The child grows up knowing something was wrong, even if no one ever acknowledged it. Then there's the subtle wound, just as painful, but harder to explain. This happens when the father was physically present, fulfilled responsibilities, but stayed emotionally distant. He provided but didn't listen. He enforced rules but held back affection. He was around, but emotionally unavailable. In this kind of relationship, many children learn not to hope, not to ask, and not to feel. They adjust to minimal emotional connection, believing that's all they can expect. This subtlety can be confusing. The child doesn't understand why they feel disconnected from someone who technically didn't do anything wrong. And because there's no clear harm, they start to question their pain. They begin to feel that missing something invisible means they're ungrateful, that needing connection is a weakness. So they shape an identity that doesn't admit the pain, it just hides it. Both types, the active and the subtle, lead to the same result, a weakened sense of self, a personality shaped around what was missing, and a constant pressure to change just to feel accepted. Jung reminded us that when faced with an absent or hurtful father, a child doesn't blame the father, they blame themselves. Silently, they decide, if he didn't see me, maybe I'm not worth seeing. That belief becomes insecurity, fear of speaking up, and discomfort with being seen. Because the father wound doesn't only say, "I wasn't loved," it says, "I wasn't recognized, and I learned to live without it." But living without being seen is exhausting. Eventually, the mind can't keep pretending it doesn't hurt. When pain can't be named, the psyche finds ways to cope. One of the most common is to deny the need completely. The child learns asking for love doesn't work. Showing feelings changes nothing. Wanting attention leads to disappointment. So they stop, not just with others, but with themselves. They stop hoping, stop expressing, stop needing. They build a type of independence that looks like strength, but deep down, it's self-denial. That child becomes the adult who never asks for help, who takes care of everything alone, who doesn't allow themselves to break down. They've learned how to survive but forgotten how to receive. Independence becomes a shield. Productivity becomes a hiding place. Emotional distance becomes protection from being ignored again. Jung said, the ego forms through adaptation. When the environment requires denial, the ego stays alive by cutting off important parts of the self. Emotions are held back. The body tenses. Spontaneity fades. All to keep things going, but at a cost. Many adults who take pride in being logical, independent, or self-reliant are actually carrying a child inside who once believed feeling is unsafe, showing pain lowers your value, needing love is too risky. So they build perfect versions of themselves that function well in the world, but feel disconnected inside. And that distance has a cost. The more you avoid your real emotions, the further you get from who you are, and the more disconnected you are, the harder it becomes to feel fully alive. That's why even in success, there can be emptiness, even with others around. There can be loneliness, even in constant activity. There can be a tiredness that never goes away. Losing touch with your inner self doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. It starts when needs aren't met. It grows when silence becomes normal. And it solidifies when someone believes that not feeling is strength, when it's actually just a way to stay unseen. Over time, this disconnection becomes a way of life. What began as a defense in childhood becomes part of their identity. The person starts to believe they're naturally closed off, naturally in control, naturally distant. But behind that image is still the child who learned not to need, and now doesn't know how to receive. Society often praises these traits: high productivity, intense focus, extreme independence. They get admired and rewarded each time someone says, "How do you do it all?" That old pain gets pushed back, but only temporarily. Jung said, "What remains unconscious becomes fate." And often, the fate of these defenses is loneliness. The person who manages everything, who avoids mistakes, who keeps others at a distance, isn't doing it because they're cold. They're doing it out of fear. Fear of opening up and getting hurt. Fear of loving and being ignored. Fear of being seen and overlooked again. Emotional distance, overthinking, the need for control. These are all ways to avoid that original pain. But in avoiding pain, we also avoid closeness. We avoid vulnerability. We avoid love. What once protected you can become a prison. Life becomes a place where emotions feel dangerous, where feeling too much is weakness, where needing someone feels unsafe. "I don't need anyone" is often the most honest and most misleading thing someone can say. Honest because that's what they learned. Needing others is too risky. Misleading because no one is meant to. Live disconnected. The more this belief grows, the harder it is to stop the cycle. Because the pain hides behind behaviors that seem normal, even admirable. But behind the achievement, the discipline, the control, is still someone who was never comforted. Someone who learned to carry everything, but deep down, just wants to rest in someone's arms without having to earn it first. When that child grows up, they bring those same defenses into relationships. What looks like personal choice or compatibility often repeats an old emotional pattern. The father wound doesn't just affect how you see yourself, it affects how you connect. People affected by this often choose partners who mirror the same emotional absence. They're drawn to those who are emotionally unavailable, distant, critical, or inconsistent. Not because they want pain, but because pain feels familiar. Jung called this symbolic repetition compulsion, the urge to go back to the original. Wound hoping for a different outcome, hoping this time the love will arrive. Hoping this time the attention will come. Hoping someone will finally say what the father never did: "You are enough." That's why so many relationships become cycles of needing proof. Instead of sources of peace, they stop being about love and become about validation. The person doesn't just want love. They want to be acknowledged. They want their partner to keep a promise their father broke. But this hope brings stress, fear, and insecurity. And over time, it pushes people away. Because no partner can heal a wound they didn't cause. The more you expect someone else to meet the needs that went unmet in childhood, the more likely you are to feel let down. The more the wound repeats, the more the relationship struggles. What began as a search for love becomes a cycle of self-sabotage. Need turns into pressure. Pain turns into control. Fear creates distance. And love becomes a test no one ever seems to pass. Understanding this pattern isn't about blame. It's about clarity. Because as long as you love from the wound, you'll keep hoping someone else will fix something only you can heal. Loving with awareness means understanding. I'm not that child anymore, and what I didn't receive back, then I can now learn to give to myself before expecting it from anyone else. Even after recognizing the wound, reactions can still show up because some pain doesn't live in logic. It lives in the unconscious, and in the unconscious, time doesn't move forward. Jung called this the father complex, a pattern of emotions not based on the actual father, but the inner imprint he left behind. This complex works like an emotional magnet. It gets triggered in certain situations and suddenly, you're responding like a child again. Even if you're 30, 40, or 60. It's the moment someone challenges you, and you shrink. You feel small, powerless, ashamed without knowing exactly why, or a simple critique sparks anger or complete withdrawal. These reactions aren't about the present moment. They're echoes. Emotional responses wired long ago when you didn't know how to protect yourself. The father complex interrupts the adult self and brings forward the wounded child, the one still hoping for approval, still afraid of rejection, still shaped by authority or neglect. And the hardest part, while this operates unconsciously, you keep reacting instead of choosing. It's like stepping into a scene where the script was written years ago and only realizing you're performing. Once the reaction begins, a boss's tone, a partner's voice, or any dominant male presence can trigger it. And afterward, you blame yourself for not handling it better. But it's not a matter of willpower, it's a pattern still running behind the scenes. The key is to observe these moments with curiosity, not shame, because the complex doesn't need to be eliminated, it needs to be recognized. And when you see that you're responding to old pain in a current situation, something shifts. You return to the present and regain the ability to choose. But the father wound doesn't just show up in reactions toward others. Sometimes the deepest damage is internal, not in your father's words, but in the voice he left behind. That inner voice doesn't shout. It whispers, you didn't do enough. There's always something missing. Don't try, you'll fail. You don't deserve rest, joy, or recognition. It sounds like responsibility, like high standards. But it's fear of failure, fear of not being worthy, fear of being rejected. Jung described this as one of the harshest effects of the shadow. When a powerful figure like a father wounds or fails you, the child's mind can't process the idea that the adult was wrong. So to maintain order, the child turns the failure inward. If he didn't love me, something must be wrong with me. If he didn't see me, maybe I don't matter. If he didn't approve, I must not be enough. This thought, repeated quietly for years, becomes belief. That belief becomes identity. You begin living under the weight of an internal system where you're the defendant, the judge, and the one delivering the sentence. Always behind, always falling short. And the most difficult part, that voice doesn't sound foreign, it feels like you. But it's not you, it's inherited. It's an old recording that's been mistaken for truth. Healing that voice doesn't mean forcing it to be quiet. It means slowly replacing it with something more real, a presence that supports without demanding perfection, that guides without punishment, that affirms without pressure. And that presence doesn't come from outside. It starts when you begin treating yourself with the respect you never received. When you stop criticizing yourself and become the adult you once needed. For women, this inner voice can take the form of a wounded animus, the internalized masculine image. Jung said this figure exists within every woman's mind. It can become a strict inner authority demanding perfection, strength, and control. It reflects a father who was cold, critical, emotionally absent, or the ideal version of one who never showed up. As a result, many women disconnect from emotions, from intuition, from softness, because they learned that strength was the only way to be valued. For men, the father wound often affects the very center of their identity. The father is meant to be the first example of healthy masculinity, a model of grounded strength and emotional presence. When that model is missing or broken, many men grow up feeling divided, confident on the outside, but empty on the inside. Always afraid of being seen as weak or exposed as not good enough. Some become extremely competitive, focused on control, always needing to prove something. Others pull away from life, avoid conflict, shrink themselves, still waiting for permission to fully exist. In both cases, the true self is hidden behind a mask, not created from the desire to be, but from the need to compensate. Jung showed that archetypes like the animus aren't problems, they're sources of energy. But when wounded, they work against you. Healing the father wound means learning to reshape that internal authority, to create a masculine presence within yourself that protects instead of punishes, that affirms without overpowering, that guides, without judgment, whether you're a man or a woman. This healing process changes the foundation of your identity, and once that changes, the world stops being something to protect yourself from and becomes a place where you can show up as yourself, because when the inner foundation is built on absence, life becomes an endless attempt to make up for what was missing, and without realizing it, you begin a lifelong search not for ordinary approval, but for the gaze you never received, the gaze of a father. That search shows up everywhere, in your work, your relationships, your lifestyle, everything becomes part of a quiet attempt to prove something, that you're capable, that you're worthy, that you matter. It's as if there's a stage set up in your mind, and someone's always watching from the front row, judging your performance, and yet, that person may not even be present anymore, or maybe they never truly were, but their role still plays out inside your psyche. Jung said that as long as a complex stays unconscious, it controls your life from behind the scenes, and the need to be seen becomes the force behind every choice, even the ones that hurt you. That's how burnout begins. You never feel fully at rest, because everything you do is still trying to rewrite an old story. Even your achievements lose meaning because they're not celebrations. They're attempts to fill the gap left by a father who never said, "I'm proud of you." And maybe the most difficult part is realizing, no achievement can rewrite the past, no success can change your childhood, no recognition can replace the love that never came. Trying to force that outcome keeps you stuck in a time that's already passed. It becomes an attempt to recover something that didn't exist in the way you needed it to. But there is a turning point, a moment when you can pause and say, "I no longer need that approval. I've grown. I can now give myself the recognition I once longed for." When that awareness begins, everything changes. The world stops feeling like a courtroom and becomes open space, a place for being, not proving, for living, not performing. Healing the father wound starts with one powerful act, naming the pain. As long as it's ignored, it continues working in the background, shaping your relationships, your self-worth, your decisions, and maybe until now you've avoided looking at that pain, but avoiding it doesn't heal it. It only delays the process. You have to say it clearly. "It hurt. Something was missing, and it still affects me." That kind of honesty creates space for something important. Feeling the anger, feeling the loneliness, feeling the grief for what never arrived, not as drama but as release. Because what we don't feel, we often repeat. But healing doesn't stop there. After naming and feeling comes the most important part, transformation. And that doesn't mean waiting for your father to change. It doesn't mean expecting others to fix what was broken. It means stepping into the role of the adult who knows how to care for themselves. Jung said that eventually, we all must become our own parents. That means building within yourself the presence that was once missing, a presence that is steady and kind, one that offers guidance without punishment. It begins when you start treating yourself with respect, when you say no to what harms you, when you stop leaving yourself behind. This inner father appears in everyday moments, in how you speak to yourself, in the boundaries you set, in the conscious choice to stop chasing approval. And that's exactly why what I'm about to suggest is so powerful. This practice is used by therapists, psychologists, and in family constellation work, writing a letter to your father. It's the same method used in healing the mother wound. But this time, the letter is to your dad. The process is simple. Write him a letter, not one that's polished, kind, or logical. This isn't for him to read. It's for you to let go. Write everything you never said. The anger, the pain, the disappointment, the longing, the silence. Write what you felt when he didn't see you, what you needed to hear and never did. Recall the times you tried to be perfect, stayed quiet, or made yourself smaller just to be noticed. Don't worry about the format. Don't worry if it makes sense. Just let it out. If you need to curse, curse. If you cry, let yourself cry. If you get stuck, keep going. This letter is your safe space to listen to yourself fully. Maybe for the first time, when you're finished, read it out loud. If you can, read it while looking at yourself in the mirror. Let the words move through you, not to relive the pain, but to release it. Then, thank him for what was possible, for what wasn't, and for everything that still brought you to this moment. And finally, burn the letter. Turn that action into a ritual. You're saying with that moment, I'm done waiting. I'm done holding this. I'm ready to let it go. From my heart to yours, do it. But do it with honesty. I say this because I've done it to. Like many, I carried wounds from my mother. They were subtle, hard to define, but with my father, it went deeper. His absence wasn't obvious, but it left a lasting impact. For years, I kept moving forward. I made sense of things. I stayed busy. Until one day, I wrote the letter. I didn't know what I'd say. I started with no plan. But once I began, everything came out. The memories, the words I never spoke, the moments I thought I had forgotten. And along with them came clarity, pieces of the puzzle that had never made sense. In that moment, I understood why I loved the way I did, why I pushed myself so hard, why I couldn't relax without guilt. That letter opened a door through pain, yes, but also toward freedom. So write yours, and if you feel ready, share it in the comments, because your words might become the beginning of someone else's healing. In addition to the letter, there are other practices that can help this healing process. One is writing to your inner child. Picture yourself as you are today, standing in front of your younger self. What did they need to hear but never did? What would you say to them now if someone had given you the language back then? Write it all down, and if you can, read it out loud. This begins to reshape how you see yourself from the inside. Another useful method is the empty chair exercise. Sit across from an empty chair and imagine your father sitting there. Say everything you've kept inside. Speak honestly. If it feels right, respond as if you were him, not to create a debate, but to let emotion move through you and out of you. There are also deeper techniques, like Jung's active imagination, where you engage directly with different parts of your psyche, the wounded child, the father figure, or the critical inner voice that's followed you. These internal dialogues can lead to honest, transformative insights. Slowly, you begin to treat yourself with more care. You learn to say enough when needed, and you start to see that caring for yourself isn't selfish, it's an act of love. If you'd like to go deeper, I've created a 21-day guided ebook with practices based on Carl Jung's ideas. They're small, structured steps designed to help bring you back to yourself. The link is pinned in the first comment. If it speaks to you, download it and begin today. As that new presence grows inside you, something starts to change quietly, but in a lasting way. The world, which once felt like a courtroom, begins to feel like a place where you can simply exist. Life, which once felt like a test, begins to feel like a path of self-expression. And for the first time, you feel like you don't need to prove anything just to belong. That's what healing the father wound really means. It's stepping away from survival mode. It's releasing the need to constantly prove your worth through someone else's approval. Because in the end, the father wound wasn't just about your dad. It was about how you came to see yourself through him. When that mirror changes, your inner world changes. You stop running. You stop trying to be the best, the strongest, the most productive. You're no longer chasing validation or avoiding judgment that was never yours to begin with. Instead, you begin to meet yourself as you are, and that brings a quiet kind of freedom, a peace that doesn't depend on praise, a strength that doesn't come from pressure. It's a strength that rises from within, a strength that comes from reconnecting to your core after years of living in the absence of what you needed. Jung called this the return to the center. It's the path that leads you away from a wounded identity and back to the self, the most honest version of who you are. It's not about becoming an ideal version of yourself. It's about letting go of the version you built to survive and becoming simply, fully, and imperfectly you. When that happens, love no longer comes from need. It flows from fullness. You no longer love to fill a gap. You love because something inside you overflows. That overflow brings you back to life. Because where there was once a void, there is now presence. Where there was fear, trust begins to grow. Maybe you've spent your whole life trying to be seen, trying to do everything right, trying to fit into a role that was never made for you. But maybe, just maybe, that's starting to change. Because when you see the wound without guilt, without denial, It stops controlling things in the background. And when you give yourself the care you've been waiting for in someone else's eyes, the cycle begins to shift. What once was a constant pursuit of approval becomes a simple act of self-respect. Not just a concept, but something real, something practiced. You don't need to keep searching for the love that never arrived. You can pause, breathe, and choose right now how you want to relate to yourself, others, and life. This isn't about erasing what hurt. It's about giving that pain a new place, one where it no longer runs your story, where you can look back with understanding and look forward with strength. If this spoke to something inside you, leave a comment that says, "I choose to be free." That's how I'll know you stayed with me to the end. And more than that, I'll know you're ready to take this next step with clarity and intention. And if this content helped you and you'd like to support the channel, consider clicking the thanks button below. Even a small contribution helps us continue sharing this message with others who need to feel seen and need to heal. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with openness. And thank you for being part of this shared journey. I'll see you in the next one.